Serdecznie witam Państwa.
A very warm welcome to all of you and to the speakers. This is another meeting organized by En Arche Foundation. My name is Grzegorz Malec and I'll be the chairperson for you today. We'll witness the debate featuring two distinguished speakers with their opinions. They are distinguished, this is what I want to highlight. They'll be speaking about the scope of explanations allowable for science. The debate is held under the banner of Is there a place for theological explanations in natural sciences? We are thus addressing a fundamental question about the functioning of science. Naturally, this issue is important for scientists because it opens a range of explanations from which they can select those that best suit to the part of the world they actually study. However, the questions of how science operates is also interesting for non-scientists. People who are interested in science, but they are not scientists themselves. This is so because scientific theories, especially theories addressing general issues, influence our worldview. We see the world differently when scientists say it began with the so-called Big Bang. We see the world differently when they say that scientists say that it's eternal. Both theories have consequences, not only in science, but also in philosophy and the worldview. What scientists say matters not only to a narrow group of true specialists, addressees. What scientists say is dependent on the scope of explanations. Explanations acceptable within what is called science. So today's meeting, today's debate, is the place to consider whether theological explanation should be believed as scientific ones. In the past, science allowed claims that certain structures in nature arose from a specific purpose. At the beginning of the 19th century, it was argued that the analysis of human eye and its complexity, functions, and similarity to human-made objects, which are known to have been created for a purpose, led to a conclusion that the very eye was purposefully created. It was intentional, and the origin of creating an eye preceded the eye existence. It was said at the beginning of the 19th century. In the second part of the 19th century, there was a radical change in explanations which are deemed scientific. This shift was linked to the publication of the book by Charles Darwin on the origin of species. Darwin repeatedly emphasized that science, on the one hand, should be free from references to supernatural beings or to this kind of phenomena. On the other hand, science should be free from theological explanations. The latter claim by Darwin is controversial. Scholars remain divided on this issue. Some argue that Darwin's understanding of science should be preserved. Others say that the development of science encourages us to return to theology, that is, explanations based on the purpose of creation. Today's debate will be the exchange of arguments from two sides, and we have wonderful speakers, as I said. First, Dr. William Dembski, who believes that science should be open to theology. Dr. Dembski is an American mathematician and philosopher of Polish origin. In 1981, he earned a bachelor's degree in psychology. 2 years later, he obtained a master's degree in statistics, then a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Chicago. He holds 2 doctorates, a PhD in mathematics from University of Chicago, 1988, and a PhD in philosophy from the University of Illinois, 1996. He has also completed postdoctoral fellowships in mathematics, physics, computer sciences. In 1998, Dr. Dembski published his first book, Inference to Design, in which he introduced the explanatory filter, a method for detecting design. This book was followed by another work, Nothing Comes for Free. Dr. Dembski is also co-editor of the collective volume From Darwin to DNA, which includes articles by both supporters but also critics of the intelligent design theory. Dr. Dembski's latest work is a new and revised and expanded edition of the book Inference to Design, available at the organizer's booth located at the back. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Dembski with a round of applause. And the other speaker, Professor Wojciech Sady, who argues that science should be free from teleological explanations. Professor Sady was born in 1952. He graduated in 1997 from physics department at Warsaw University. In 1980, he earned a PhD in philosophy. In 1992, a postgraduate habilitation degree from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. He was awarded a title of professor in 2001. Main scientific interests: philosophy of science and history of science. He authored the book The Dispute over Scientific Rationality, From Lancare to Laudan. Personal investigations into mechanisms of science were included in the Relative and Quantum Structure book in physics. Professor Katarzyna Górczyńska-Sady is his wife. They co-authored Anthropocene, Opportunities and Threats. Professor Sady has also translated Russell's Ludwig Wittgenstein, Imre Lakatos, Michael Dammert, and Jiddu Krishnamurti text. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Professor Sady. Before I hand over to the speakers, a few housekeeping announcements. The event is composed of 4 panels. First, Dr. Dembski, followed by Professor Sady presenting his opinion. The third panel is a debate, a discussion between speakers. Finally, there'll be the time for questions, and you are warmly invited to join in. And also encourage you to visit the organizer's booth after the debate. At the booth, you can purchase various books related to the origin of universe, life, and humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment has come to hand over to our speakers, Dr. Dembski and Professor Sady. I wish them success, and may this 90-minute slot be a thought-provoking period for all of you.
Okay, very good. Do you want me to speak there or here? Just here, okay. So I'm on. Okay, thank you. Well, I would like to start just by giving a little bit of landscape about, just covering the sorts of options that are before us. The question, as it was posed to me, is there a place for teleological explanation in science? And then Grzegorz just now mentioned natural sciences. That changes things a bit, but I'd like to just give some overview of different types of explanations in science. I think a resistance to teleological explanation in science doesn't just go back to Darwin. I mean, if you read Francis Bacon, who was in a sense the first philosopher of science in the modern era. He questioned Aristotle's formal and final causes as not having a legitimate place in science. He thought that efficient and material causes were just fine, but not formal and final causes. But I think, he was thinking of formal causes in an essentialist way where it was there was a whole bunch of metaphysical baggage, as he saw, connected with it. And then even final causes, it was the sort of thing that the playwright Molière ridiculed, where what causes opium to make you sleep? Well, it has dormitive power. Okay, so dormitive power, what does that tell you? I mean, it's just a way of rephrasing that it helps you to get to sleep, but it doesn't tell you anything about the chemical properties of opium that would make you fall asleep. And so I think there was this emphasis on trying to go beyond these sorts of simplistic teleological explanations. Now, with Darwin, I think there's some different issues at stake. I mean, when you're talking about, for instance, dormitive power of opium, there's a process. I mean, the opium will do things in the body, and it will do those repeatedly and reliably. Darwin was looking at an origins question. I think this is an important distinction that we I'd like to put out there, and then perhaps something we can discuss. But it's a lot of science just looks at repeatable processes, and I think in a lot of that, there's no real place for teleology. We just try to understand what the process is doing. But when it comes to the origin of things, often there is no process. I mean, there's something new, unprecedented. A threshold is being passed. So with origins, often we don't have that sort of explanation. Now, Darwin himself, I would say, didn't eliminate teleological explanation. I think what he did is he tried to limit it. He did not want teleological explanation in science. The great claim of his theory was that he could explain everything in biology without needing to invoke teleology. But that raises the question whether his theory was in fact powerful enough to explain the sort of biological phenomena that he was investigating. Evolution is a theory. It says that you can get from point A to point B through a process that uses certain resources, natural selection, random variations. But if there's a point A and a point B where there is no plausible pathway according to these Darwinian resources, then you might ask, well, has this theory actually explained it? And should the range of explanations that we might want to invoke be more than just these purely natural processes? And I think of one passage, I believe in The Origin of Species, where Darwin says, there are creationists who say that certain things were created and other things could have evolved, but they can't give a precise criterion for what was specially created and what evolved, okay? And so, in a sense, he allows for creation or an intelligent design explanation, but he just says the people on the creation side haven't given a good enough account of how you can distinguish between what's within the reach of evolution and what's needed for a teleological or design explanation. So I think he didn't rule it out. I think what we call methodological naturalism, the idea that science must proceed only on naturalistic or materialistic principles and cannot invoke any sort of intelligence. That, I think, is actually subsequent to Darwin, and it's become this kind of rule. But the question is, do we want to saddle ourselves with that rule? And it seems that when we can look at some thought experiments in which it becomes clear that we can't just rule out teleological causes. So, let's just give an example of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. What are we doing in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence? We're looking for signals, radio signals from outer space that come to planet Earth. We don't know the causal story of how they got there. All we are seeing are these signals. We're ruling out that these signals were done on Earth. So there's no contamination. These are not signals that are being generated on Earth, but we think they're coming from outer space. So we know they're coming from outer space. What would convince us that we're dealing with an alien intelligence? Now, is there anything that could convince us? Now, if you look at the SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence literature, they'll say, I mean, these are the sorts of things we're looking at. Typically, it's put in terms of a techno-signature. You're looking at a signature of technology. So there's something in the sequence or the radio signal that will point to a technology being behind it, which would then indicate that there is design or teleology. There are many naturally produced radio signals. So what would allow us to distinguish the one from the other? Okay. Now, if we allow that SETI is part of the natural sciences, I mean, we're looking at nature. These are signals that could be coming in. So far, SETI, or the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, has not come up with any convincing signal that it's actually the result of an alien intelligence. But we can imagine a signal coming in that gives us the cure for cancer, gives us a solution to the Riemann conjecture, solves all sorts of interesting problems for us. If that sort of signal came to us, we would be convinced that we're dealing with an alien intelligence. And it really doesn't matter, if that intelligence is God, an angel, or something materially instantiated. We would know in that case that we're dealing with an intelligence. And so what is it that would convince us of that? Well, it's a certain type of information. And this is something I deal with in my book, The Design Inference. These sorts of techno-signatures that we look at, they would have to be small probability specified events. So that's my criterion for intelligent design, for detecting design. And I don't want to review that, at least not in just laying some of the groundwork here. But, so I think there's a sense in which we have to allow for teleology, because it could, given enough evidence, it could be overwhelming. There was a documentary that was done in 2008, that's when it was released in the United States, called Expelled: No Intelligence Allowed. It was Ben Stein, famous actor in the United States, went around interviewing people about the question of intelligent design. And at one point, he interviewed Richard Dawkins, who is probably the preeminent atheist, certainly in the English-speaking world. And I don't think it's an accident that he is a Darwinist. And he was asked about what would happen if, what could be convincing evidence that life was designed. And he said, well, one possibility would be he could imagine an alien intelligence coming in a spaceship and seeding life on planet Earth, basically creating it and putting clear indicators into the DNA or whatever that it was designed. And we've seen something like this already. Craig Venter, who is one of the people that cracked the Human Genome Project, in his synthetic genomics project, would embed the names of his colleagues and coworkers in DNA. So he would write it in DNA. I mean, our DNA is a language, and you can write language. I mean, on computers, it's always, we use bits, but then with DNA, it's 4 possibilities at each point instead of 2. So you could write anything you want there, and if inside the DNA, if you read, in every one of our DNA, if there was a sequence that said "made by Yahweh," I think you'd be hard pressed. You'd either think some alien intelligence was playing a joke, or maybe it was even God who did that. But the point is, this is there, and I would want to put this more broadly. Information theory, information is part of science, and information can convince us that we're dealing with intelligence, and that information can arise anywhere. It can arise, certainly it arises in the social sciences, it arises in human culture, it arises in politics, but it can also arise in the natural sciences. And if we see it in the natural or in nature, we have to deal with it also. So it seems to me it would be artificial to rule out teleology from the natural sciences. It may be that we never find it. We've never found it with search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but I think it cannot be valid to just rule it out on first principles. So I'm sorry I went over a little bit.
Thank you, Dr. Dembski, for presenting his position. And now over to Professor Sady. Thank you. From time to time, we ask ourselves a question whether what happens around us, our life in particular, has got a purpose. Is there any goal, or is just empty passing, day in, day out? Nothing will be left behind. Some accept this emptiness. They accept the fact that we live for nothing, for no purpose, while others look for positive answers. When I read Buddhist books, I came across a story. 2,500 years ago, there was a man on the Ganges River who achieved nirvana, the highest possible goal. And having become Buddha, this man showed us the way to achieve it, to achieve nirvana. I grew up in a house with Roman Catholic Church religion. At home and in the church, I was taught that life has a purpose, and this purpose will be fulfilled on the day of judgment. To prepare us for that day, God made a covenant with Abraham, and then he passed the law to Moses, and finally the Son of God died for our sins on the cross. When I used to go to school and university, Poland was a socialist country, and I was taught that humanity has a purpose, and the ultimate goal is to build a communist society. This was supposed to be scientifically proven by Karl Marx. Now we've got the word science mentioned. New hopes arise, because these answers given by great religions and political ideologies and philosophies contradicted one another. Science is one and common for all humanity. Moreover, scientific beliefs are very well justified. So we look towards science. What science can tell us about the purpose of life and the world in general? And I must disappoint you at the beginning. I have basic textbooks on physics, chemistry, biology at home in my home library, and these books never mention the purpose of life and the purpose of the world. Science, by design, is value-free and avoids questions about the meaning of life. However, in recent decades, on the fringes of physics and biology, there were some line of thoughts that have emerged and whose purporters claim that scientific research results strongly suggest that is strong in our life. Everyday matters is not the end. There is something deeper. They do not claim that the purpose is deductible, but this gives us new impulses to think about the purpose of life and the world. On the one hand, this is anthropic principle in physics, which we won't have time to discuss at this meeting. On the other hand, this is scientific creationism theme, better known as theory of intelligent design. And Professor Dr. William Dembski is probably the most prominent representative of this theory on Earth. And now, time for a question. Well, actually, I still have 5 minutes. I'll share my doubts. I'll be speaking off topic without actually referring to intelligent design theory at all. I want to explain why I deeply doubt the existence of any purpose of life and the purpose of the world. Regarding the inanimate world, well, it is hard to find any purpose. When we look at photos of the Mars surfaces, we can't see any purpose when it comes to the rocks that have been scattered around that planet. Similarly, when we look through a large telescope at galaxies, these galaxies seem to be randomly distributed in space, at least until now, each of them rotating around their centers of mass, apparently without any great purpose. Moreover, one of the fundamental laws of physics is the law of increasing entropy, which tells us that the world as a whole is doomed to die because of heat. So not only does everything rotate without any purpose, but it will be less interesting to see what will happen on the way. The most interesting things happen when energy flows from one place to another and the energy density equalizes. We cannot prevent it. The worst thing for me is to think about the vastness of it all. If we say life of animals and plants, which does not seem to have the one with a specific purpose, it is rather the way to survive and to reproduce, and it comes to an end. So let's look at humans and let's instill some hope, thinking that there is something in us, something very special. We may be the crown of creation, something that gives meaning to the whole. And then I'm struck by the insignificance of our human affairs. Think how little we matter in the space, in cosmos. Think about the mock-up of a universe and you scale it down by 10 billions of times so that the Earth is in the size of a ball of 1 millimeter in diameter. And on this model, the Sun is about 12 meters away, and the nearest star system, or the double, Alpha and Proxima Centauri double system, is located, be careful, around 3,000 kilometers. And now, think about our galaxy, the Milky Way, composed of 100 billion stars. In our model, it would be 80 million kilometers in diameter. So, in a mock-up, the Earth is just 1 millimeter. 80 million kilometers is something that is hard to imagine. And Milky Way is not the end of the world. Beyond it, there are many others that we could see through large telescope. The part that is visible for us, only a fraction of a whole, contains about 200 billion galaxies in this visible part. According to the latest estimates and research, well, it is not perfectly reliable data, but good enough for scientific approximation. Our galaxy contains about 200 million Earth-like planets, which are similar to our planet. So, multiplied by 200 billion galaxies, and you'll get enormous number to imagine, but, well, numbers are to grasp. 200 billions multiplied by 200 billion, quite a lot. Well, if in a supernatural way, if I were told by an angel appearing in front of me, saying that life in the space exists in this visible planet, in this visible part on 100 planets, I would not be surprised. This means that 2 galaxies per 1 inhabited planet. Yes, so this is a share of the universe. That's the way it is. And one more thing, I'll exceed my time by 30 seconds. If you leave this building, walk south along Marszałkowska Street, past Constitution Square, Survivor Square, and reach the area near Łazienkowska Route, you'd cover 1.5 kilometers. If you use this as a timeline from the Big Bang, 1 millimeter equals 10,000 years. That means that from creation of the first civilizations, meaning the start of human history, 0.5 millimeter on this scale. From the beginning of Christianity, 1/5 of a millimeter. So on this 1.5 kilometer stretch, almost 1/5 of the millimeter represents the time that we have been discussing. Most people connect their hopes with this time, hoping that their life has a sense, a meaning, a purpose. So this is a fundamental obstacle for me. It was my personal confession. We'll probably move towards intelligent design, but for now, this is all I wanted to say. Thank you, Professor Sady, for presenting his position. Ladies and gentlemen, now we know the speaker's opinion. We move on to the next panel, the discussion. Professor Sady, Professor Dembski, I give you the floor.
You want to do? Okay, very good. Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments. There are many places that I'd like to jump in, but I think I'd like to start with, there's a famous Catholic thinker, Blaise Pascal, and he at one point, I think it's in his Pensées, he writes that in its size, the universe swallows me up, but with my mind, I encompass the universe. And I think there's a huge difference between significance and size. It seems to me they're fundamentally disconnected. A Chopin piano concerto, its significance doesn't depend on how big the universe is. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that this is a fundamental distinction. But even if size is important to you, it's interesting, what scale are you going to be using? If you're putting it in terms of millimeters and just sheer number of, let's say, elementary particles in the universe and the size of different things. What if you use a logarithmic scale instead of a standard sort of scale? Well, it turns out that humans, we're about 1.5 meters tall, we're actually pretty close to the middle in terms of size. If you go to the very smallest, to the Planck scale, or you go to the very largest, the scale of the observable physical universe, we are pretty much smack in the middle. You can just do it, run the numbers. So on a logarithmic scale, we're kind of in the middle. Does that give us then a better perspective? Does that increase our significance? I mean, I don't care to really make an argument that because on a logarithmic scale, we're exactly where we're supposed to be. I don't know if we're supposed to be there. But I think we want to be very careful about distinguishing size and significance and even time frame and significance. If God has put us here for a purpose, if God's had to create a world which took a long time for us to come so that we're finally, at this moment in the world, the most important things happen, that we as humans are here, then who are we to say that, all that history, all that deep time that led up to it, is unimportant. And one thing I would also point out, probably the most famous and important observational astronomer of his generation was Alan Sandage at Caltech. He converted to intelligent design at the end of his life. I mean, he had a conversion, I think it was in the mid-'80s. I met him at a conference, it was a Templeton-sponsored conference, and he read my book. I mean, he, on intelligent design, the bridge between science and theology, he was all behind it. So here's somebody who would appreciate the size of the universe and our seeming insignificance, and yet he did not draw that conclusion. So why don't I leave it there if you want to respond, and then we can, I've got other things that I'd like to speak to as well.
This was my professional confession. If something or someone, or let me put it differently. You claim that design is scientifically detectable, right? Some kind of pattern. But the question is, what we are dealing with is not just the design itself, but the realization of the design. These are living organisms which are supposed to be made according to that design. So the question is, the design itself does not realize itself. Someone designed the watch, but someone else made it. So here comes the question. Beyond design itself, the question is necessary to ask, to start speculations. Who was the maker, the doer? Who realized the design? Did the designer influence the course of events? Did the designer impact it in a strange way by choosing this earthly speck in something unimaginably vast, placing their special intentions here? Or we can speculate whether, well, as Giordano Bruno said, since God is indefinite, he creates indefinite number of inhabited worlds. That's also plausible and believable. But still, the question remains, who made it? Who's the doer? And this something, someone, cannot be itself the element of the natural world. According to the arguments you have presented, this thing or something could not have arisen in the world because it would be too complex to be a natural creation. And if this created life as it is, this must have broken the natural laws. The laws of nature do not allow to create living cells. For example, when I read about a living cell's works, eukaryotic especially, eukaryotes that we are made up of, it makes my head spin with amazement. I don't understand it. It's a system of billions of chemical particles working together efficiently. And supposedly I have billions of cells in my body, and they collaborate with one another. I cannot marvel enough about the wonder of this device that I am myself. So my question, do you think it can work on its own? Once it was made, or does it need any care? My body, how does it work? Does it work on its own? At the moment, right now?
It seems to me that you can, it's possible to set up a system that will just act for purposes. You give it enough complexity, you program it, and it can express itself. So it seems that that is a possibility. But there's also a sense in which you could have a system that is responsive to outside information, much as a radio is responsive to a radio signal. But I think, when you said this has to function in a natural way, and that if there's some sort of outside intervention, that violates the natural laws. And that's not clear to me, because ever since the revolution in quantum mechanics, we have a universe that's informationally porous. Information can come in. So things happen that are, that quantum events happen that seem to be random. But the thing is, what do we mean by them being random? They're not, there's no, you don't have this classical deterministic picture by knowing exactly what the position and momentum of all objects were at one point will allow you to predict with perfect certainty what will happen after. That's the old Laplacian vision. That's the Newtonian vision. That vision is dead, with the rise of quantum mechanics. Now, there are ways that people try to get around quantum mechanics. They may do with multi-world interpretation. There are different ways of interpreting it. But in terms of the math for quantum mechanics, you need probabilities. And the thing is, when you have probabilities, you have these uncertainties, and you don't know what the ultimate cause is. So for all I know, God at the quantum level is controlling everything. Now, I'm not saying that that's required by the theory. I'm sympathetic to that. I think there are other ways that God could get into it. I think God can get into things even with a purely deterministic world. There are ways in which God can set up initial conditions so that things that God wants to have happen at certain times happen. They get triggered, and we can't really even predict what would happen because these systems are chaotic. They're threshold effects, so you can't even predict it, and yet God can work his purposes there, or a designer, whatever. So I think I don't see that what you're saying imposes any sort of limits on what the designer can accomplish.
If a project has been created and this project is to be delivered, certain laws of nature need to be violated, because according to the laws of nature, living organism could not have been created. So there's a question. This violation of natural laws, I'm asking whether it's happening now. Because if it is happening out now, this violation of laws of physics should be detectable in a scientific way. For example, the energy retention or momentum retention law is naturally violated. Something is moving and something tells it to turn right in an unnatural way. So there is a violation of the law of nature. So there is a question: do you hope that these acts of natural laws violation will be detectable in a scientific way?
Well, I would go back a step and say, how do you know that laws are actually being broken? I mean, here we are talking, I raised this, I'm acting as an intelligent agent. Is there any law being broken in me acting as an intelligent agent? I would say no. So just in general, it seems that laws, I'm not sure where a law is being broken. Even if, let's say, an immaterial designer is inputting information into the world, it's not clear that conservation of information needs to be violated, because if you have these quantum effects, they can average out. There need be no loss of information. So I think a designer could make himself evident in the world, whether by violating laws, but these are laws that he himself presumably then instituted, so I'm not sure what violation would mean there. But I'm not seeing there's a distinction also I think we need to keep in mind. I mean, there's sort of the causality. What's the process? How are things happening? And then there is the actual detection of the design, where we can know that it's designed regardless of what the causal story is. So, I mean, let's say I had 1,000 marbles and I threw them on the floor. They would take some sort of random configuration, most likely. But what if they spelled, "Welcome to the debate of Professor Sady and Bill Dembski at En Arche," and if it spelled it out in very neat letters, it would obviously, I think we would be compelled to infer that this arrangement was designed, even if we didn't know, was there somebody controlling this with magnets? Was there something else? Was there some initial condition at the origin of the universe which then played itself out here? And I think this is also one of the consequences if we think in information theoretic terms. The information, it seems always we can explain subsequent information in terms of prior information, but it could be that all the information needed that we see in biology was inputted at the very beginning, but that information would still have to be designed. And if it was there right at the beginning, there would be no violation of natural laws, because to violate something, you have to have something that's already ongoing, and it would be there. I mean, so this is one option that philosophers have considered, that all the information, all the design was put there at the very beginning. I don't personally believe that, because I don't think, it's hard for me to imagine what in the primordial plasma of the universe, just where was all the organization that led to life on planet Earth? I think it becomes an article of faith. I don't think there's any way to really assess that empirically. But I think I just don't see, when we design things, when we act as intelligent agents, there's no need to invoke any sort of violation. And it's not clear that if you have an immaterial designer, that there would need to be a violation. And then you still deal with also this example of a Richard Dawkins in Expelled, where he allows that we could know that an alien intelligence created life on Earth. If our DNA indicated certain patterns, I think we could be compelled to conclude that we were the result of some sort of alien intelligence. Well, if an alien intelligence could be convincing to us, perhaps a non-material intelligence could be. I think we have to allow those possibilities. And I guess I would put it to you, what law particularly is being violated if information is coming in, especially at these sort of quantum gaps, these places where the quantum measurement problem breaks down, where I don't think we're in a position to say that any law was broken. I mean, could you flesh out why you think intelligent design actually requires a violation of laws? I mean, I guess I'm just not seeing it.
In order to carry out something according to the design, there must be laws of nature that are broken and violated, right? Since the laws of nature do not allow certain systems to arise in a natural way, I'll quote another example, because I want to understand this better. I want to go beyond what you wrote in your book, the book that I'm showing. I want to go further out with more questions. Let's take the example of farmers spreading pesticides in the field. There were insects in that field that were pests for a farmer. Sometimes pesticides kill all the insects of given species, but sometimes the insects population has got millions, and there are 3 that are resistant to this pesticide because they have had some genomic mutation. And those insects will survive. They mate, and these specific genetic traits are inherited. After 3 years, we have the very same insects, but they are resistant to this pesticide. This is what we are constantly struggling with. The industry keeps producing new pesticides because the use creates resistant strains of insects, resistant strains of weeds. So here comes the question. From the point of view of intelligent design, should we assume that at the beginning of all times, the thing that created design anticipated that pesticides of a certain kind would appear, and we would have to insert these genomic traits so that they become resistant to these pesticides? And others don't have this trait, and all insects in a specific species die. The same happens to bacteria or sparrows in stations that acquire new traits because they live in a different environment. Did they have these traits embedded in their genome right from the beginning, so that this was some kind of rooted, because there was something predicted the creation of train stations, and sparrows have to be less resistant to frost, but they jump closer to humans so that they have a better chance of gaining food. That designer, does he have to observe the Earth on an ongoing basis and react? So introduce new designs, because if they introduce new designs, the changes that happened in front of our eyes will require breaking the laws of nature, right?
Okay. Well, I'm grateful. I mean, I think you've helped clarify what your concerns are. I mean, let me give you an example. If I see a rusted old automobile, I see design there, but I also see the effects of weathering, of the effects of chance and necessity, if you will. And I think a similar thing is with the systems you're looking at. I mean, intelligent design is not saying that Darwinism is completely wrong. Okay, Darwinism seems to account for insects developing insecticide resistance, bacteria developing antibiotic resistance. That's no problem. And in fact, what I would say, insofar as these organisms are designed, the designer has given them a certain adaptive potential, which in a sense exploits Darwinian mechanisms so that they can adapt to changing environmental conditions. I mean, the thing is, software engineers will do this. They'll build adaptive systems so that it doesn't just apply to one situation. So I think, is it Google Alpha, where they can basically take the same program and turn it into a world-class chess player, world-class Go player, world-class checkers player. So it's adaptive, and in fact, it's harder to build these adaptive systems than one that is simply for a given use. And so I think that actually speaks to the design to have adaptive systems like this, the systems that can do their own genetic engineering. I mean, so I think the design is in a sense then more subtle. It allows for Darwinian processes to work, but it doesn't say that Darwinian processes account for everything. And I think that's the real point, that Darwinism has this place where it breaks down. And where's the precise place? I think that's going to be for research to decide. But I think the design is we have there's this distinction. Where does one kick in and where does the other where does it leave off? And I think that's the challenge. How far can you push these Darwinian processes? Can they account for everything? And it seems to me and my colleagues that the creative potential of the Darwinian mechanism is really quite limited, so that it can't do as much as is claimed for it. So that I think it's. I guess I'll just leave it there. But I guess this is the point I would want to make. For the design theorist, it's not crucial that every aspect of the world be designed. Okay, because in a sense, what the Darwinian and materialist is saying is there is no design anywhere. Now, if you want to negate that logically, it's not that everything is designed. It's rather that there is some instance of design that we can detect and know. So, that's the negation. The materialist is taking a very strong position, saying there's absolutely no design. So the negation of that is there's some design. So even one clear instance of design at the origin of life, or with Michael Behe's bacterial flagellum or something, could convince us, or should convince us, if the evidence is good enough, that we're dealing with real design.
No dobrze, czyli... Ale teraz, czy domniemane istnienie...
Whether the presumed existence of a design would somehow suggest us that whatever executed the design has some intentions towards us. This thing wants something from us, or is this thing just fooling around? Because this is another step. I'm trying to move from the project or design to the purpose. I know it's risky. If we could demonstrate that we are designed, that would be a lot, because it would be a proof that the world does not end with ordinary matters. There is something extra beyond. But if we are designed, can we go any further from that? We have the vision from the book of Job, where Yahweh and Satan are sitting and betting on what will happen if we interfere with the normal course of things. This course would be proceeded around the natural laws of nature, but Satan interferes in a supernatural way in the course of events. He keeps Job's children, he kills his servants, I believe, I don't remember this. He sends a disease upon Job himself. This is a matter of bet, I think. Are you frightened with the thought that we might be also the victims of this bet? There are some powerful forces beyond the world that choose this speck of dust called Earth and said to themselves, let's create something, let's create beings that can cause global warming, and let's see if they can handle it this or that way, or will they bring about their own destruction. Is this a kind of bet that we're speaking about? And if so, can we expect anything good from the vision that we are designed? Because you ended your lecture with a reference to Christianity, that is a good hope. But can we also have the bad hope, I mean, can't we be afraid? Because if I live on the speck of dust and I have nothing beyond myself, there is nothing to fear of. I know that my life is empty, but nothing threatens me.
A tak to nie boję się?
I'm not afraid.
Well, I'm not afraid, but I think, you know, if you're simply looking at the natural world, and if you find that there's an intelligent designer there, that still doesn't tell you anything necessarily about the morality of that designer, the intentions of that designer, whether the designer is a trickster. You have, for instance, people who are working in the field of artificial intelligence and speculating about it, people called transhumanists. They will talk about these systems that that basically our world is a simulation by some hacker, some graduate student in another dimension who has programmed us. It's a logical possibility, I guess, if you think that that consciousness and intelligence is something that's reducible to computation. I think there are good reasons to think that that's not the case. But if you just look at the world, it's a mixed bag. I mean, if all you have is an intelligent designer, and intelligent just means that it's a real intelligence. It doesn't say anything about the morality of that designer, what that designer is doing. I think one of the reasons Charles Darwin reacted to design is he saw all the brutality in nature. William Paley, if you read his book, The Natural Theology, it's the second to the last chapter, which is, I think, the longest chapter, and he basically tries to justify that really the world isn't such a bad place. Yes, animals die, they get sick, but usually they get finished off pretty quickly. There's a minimal amount of pain. And Darwin looks at the natural world, and he will consider, for instance, this Ichneumonidae wasp. It's a type of wasp which stings a caterpillar, lays its eggs in there, doesn't kill the caterpillar because the eggs need to hatch and feed on the caterpillar while it's alive, because as long as it's alive, it's not rotting away. And he thought that this was monstrous, and I would say it is monstrous. But I can come at this as a Christian, seeing the world as a fallen place, and that there's also the promise of God, and that this is not a perfect world, and that utopia, to the degree that it exists, is in another world. So that's, the Christian revelation has always been rested on two pillars. There's the natural order, the creation. God in Genesis 1 is the creator, but in the New Testament, God is also the Redeemer. And you need both those. Now, I think if you don't have God as Redeemer, then you can look at the natural world and you can think that God is a trickster, God is, that you've got some very nasty things going on, and it's going to be hard to sort out who is this designer. So I do think you need not just general revelation, the revelation of God in creation, but also special revelation, the revelation of God in the redemption through Jesus Christ. So that's what gives me comfort. Jesus, in one point in the gospel, he says the love of many is going to grow cold because of iniquity. Iniquity will abound, and the love of many will grow cold. So that is one of the main ways that people lose their faith. It's by seeing the evil in the world and then thinking that there cannot be a good God to account for it. And so I think that is one of the greatest challenges to our faith, to be able to hold on to God even in the face of the evil that we see. And there is evil in the natural order. I mean, the sort of parasites, disease, and things we see, the pain there, and then certainly in the moral order, in which Poland has experienced at the hands of the Nazis and the communists, this sort of evil. So, but I think you need a broader perspective. You need to see that God is greater than all of this, and that, that there is. It's not enough just to have the science. I remember reading in a famous American evolutionist, Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote that ever since Darwin, we know that we were not created in the image of a benevolent God. So this is what he took from his evolutionary story. But even with intelligent design, you could still see a lot of evil, you know. So I think you need that broader perspective if you're going to see good in this world. So.
Czyli
So,
jednak cele nie będą
the purpose
badalne,
are not
tak? Nie ma
investigated in a scientific way.
korzystania z
There is no
dodatków,
possibility
żeby
of
znaleźć
tapping
cel.
into scientific deliverers to find the purpose.
Zaakceptuje pan
You'll accept
to, że
the fact
szukanie inteligentnego
that looking
projektu
for
to
intelligent
jest-
design is
kończy się na pokazaniu, że
the
właśnie
demonstration
prawa przyrody nie
that
wystarczą,
natural laws are not enough
zrozumieć to, co się dzieje.
to understand everything that
Jeśli
is happening.
się wam uda,
If you can
mówię
do
o
it,
was
and I'm
jako o
speaking
ruchu
you, that is the movement
inteligentnego
of intelligent
projektu,
design
naukowego
or
kreacjonizmu,
scientific creationism,
to nadal to nas
still it does not bring us together to the answer about the purpose of life. This purpose will still not be scientifically investigable. We'll have to rely on faith. And this faith will be, as once said Giordano Bruno, a belief that is translated into habit. You believe because it is a habit. I may be a Christian because I was raised in a Christian family. Someone else was raised in a Hindu family, so they are Hindu. This is natural course of things. A person absorbs before they can think on their own. These are religious habits that they are infiltrated with. And this is scientifically verifiable. As sociologists can study social conditions that lead us to religious faith. As psychologists can study the conditions that lead us to religious faith. But then these studies, as a matter of fact, bring about no argument for a particular faith that will arise from that, so that they would support any kind of belief or denomination. So do we agree with this? That the purpose is difficult to learn in a scientific way, and we are condemned to irrational decisions, or we have to follow the footsteps of our ancestors?
Well, you know, when you say that anything, I mean, you're implying that everything outside of science is irrational, and I would dispute that. I mean, the claim that everything outside of science is irrational is then not a scientific claim, so it is itself irrational. I don't mean to be cute, but you know, it's you cannot simply assert that the only thing is rational is science, because that is not a scientific claim. It's not something that you can support by evidence. So I think, you know, to say that the reasons we can have, and we can have good reasons for things that don't fall under natural science, it seems to me, is, you know, it should not be problematic. But, you know, I think, you know, it seems like you really want to get what is the purpose, you know, what is the deeper meaning, especially to human life. And it seems to me there's a distinction between purpose and evidence of purpose. We can know that something was created by a purposeful being, may well have a purpose without knowing the purpose. I'm told that there was a room at the Smithsonian Institution in the United States, this is this museum, which had things that were obviously designed, but nobody could figure out what they did. I had a friend whose father had a meat market. He was a Polish friend of mine in high school. He had a meat market. He had this big machine there, which apparently had been constructed in Germany, but nobody could figure out what it did. And he would have people look at it. Now, maybe he could have tracked it down, but you know, there's a famous, I guess it's called an orrery, or it's It's a device that captures how the planets and stars move. It's called the Antikythera mechanism. It was found, I think, submerged in the Mediterranean. I think initially people didn't know what it was, and I think they probably still don't know a lot of what it was. But you know that it was constructed, it's got gears and things, and you know that it was designed. And if we never figure out its full purpose, I think that still doesn't invalidate that the design is there and it's real. Science does not let us look inside the mind of God and say, this is what your purpose is. God has to reveal that to us. But that doesn't mean that we can't know that something was or was likely to be created for a purpose, that there is evidence of purpose. I think this is what the design inference does. It tells you that an intelligence, that from certain marks in things, we can tell that an intelligence was responsible for them. So, I mean, this is, again, this sort of techno-signature in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. There is information that can tell us that we're dealing with intelligence. And I would stress, I mean, this notion of information, that is something that's what tells us we're dealing with intelligence. And information is not something that you can bind by natural laws. I mean, this is a theme that Professor Sady has mentioned now, I think, in several guises, where the laws of nature are insufficient. They're going to be violated if there's design. But I just don't see that. The laws of nature allow all sorts of possibilities. Laws of nature are always constrained by initial and boundary conditions. If you look at all the equations, that characterize partial differential equations that characterize the dynamics of various systems, they always require that you set up the boundary conditions if you're going to get a unique solution. So you always need that, and those boundary conditions allow for many, many possibilities. So you can't really, I don't see how you can constrain the information that natural laws can do that. Natural laws, I don't think, have the power. And natural laws don't specify what those boundary conditions or those initial conditions are. It can be as simple as Galileo and the Tower of Pisa, but where is he dropping it from? Where he drops it from and how, and the position from which he drops it, will determine whether the speed with which it lands and whether it lands on somebody's head, lands on a pigeon, or whatever. And who's determining that? Well, I mean, Galileo is, but those boundary conditions allow for many, as statisticians would say, many degrees of freedom. And those degrees of freedom, then it seems, allow a fertile ground for all the information we need in this world and information that could reliably tell us that we're dealing with intelligence. So I don't really see that you've put an insuperable limitation on intelligent design.
Yes, but even in a system that is governed by statistical laws, there must be energy, momentum, angular momentum, electric charge, and a whole range of other quantities. They need to be retained. These are strict dependencies from which there are no deviations if our current knowledge of physics can hold it together and explain it. And here is my doubt that I'm speaking about, that I was trying to express. Design is one thing. Execution, according to the design, is yet another thing. If it were to be executed to the design, then the system cannot arise in accordance with natural laws. If this is the case, the natural laws are broken or violated, at least temporarily. Perhaps this happened once in history, about 4 billion years ago, when life was emerging on Earth. That it does not occur any longer.
Tu jest problem.
There is a problem indeed.
Tak samo jeżeli pytamy o
The
początek
problem is when we ask about the origin of life. There is no model in biology that explains the emergence of the first living cell or a group of living cells. But much indicates that life on Earth appeared in the depths of the oceans near hydrothermal vents. It is the thing that was discovered in 1970s. There is a plenty of life around such places, where something emerges from the Earth's mantle through cracks in the crust. And science says that Earth is 100 million years after its formation to be covered with the oceans. And the first traces of life in indigenous rocks date back to 3.7 million years. There were 400 million years for something to happen in the area of these vents. But the oceanic crust is replaced once every 100 million years, just like the lands we live on. Some rocks are 4 billion years old. The seafloor is replaced every 100 million years. It is pushed into the Earth's mantle, melts, it's melted and leaves no traces. So, if proto-evolution was there over hundreds of millions of years, all traces of this have been naturally erased, vanished and disappeared. This is a symmetrical problem, because my question is whether this intervention of the Creator, or whatever you call this phenomenon, does this intervention occur continuously? That's why my question. Did it happen once? Were mosquitoes equipped with pesticides resistance right from the beginning? Because this something anticipated a chemical compound might appear late in the future. And then there are no traces after this intervention. So we have a symmetrical situation from the point of view of naturalism. So that is evolutionary theory or proto-evolution. How did that happen before the first cells were formed? How did that happen? All traces could have been removed and will never be accessible to us. Similarly, the vision of the Creator who intervened long ago but cannot be now studied, learned about or verified. It is impossible to test it, to check whether it happened. I once spoke to Archbishop Józef Rzeciński, who was an outstanding philosopher of science and a philosopher of nature. He was a philosopher of nature, and Rzeciński said that God intervened only at the beginning of the process. And then Homo erectus saw one intervention. Homo erectus turned into Homo sapiens. From that time, God began placing immortal souls in our bodies. That's the way it is. So probably our dispute will be irresolute because we both lack possibilities.
Unfortunately, I've lost about the last minute. I'm not sure if the translator stopped or if... wrong channel. Well, I've been on number 2.
So you didn't understand?
Just about the last... Just the last minute, I think. But I think I got much of what you said.
A teraz jest tłumaczenie?
Is this being interpreted at the moment?
On the second channel?
I've been on the second channel right along. So it was just was just in the last minute that it stopped. Now I'm hearing you. Yes. Okay.
So,
Yeah. Okay. The
So now
technical
you hear-
problem. But let's. Why don't I just jump in? You know, I think the question of evidence being lost. I mean, it's too bad when evidence is lost. You know, I'll grant that. But you know, the thing is, lost arts are lost not because the evidence is lost. I mean, that's the problem with lost arts. But we don't, for that reason, stop thinking that something is designed. So, I mean, can anybody build a violin as good as a Stradivarius or a De Jesus? You know, I think those are considered the best violins ever made. All the great violinists want one of those. You know, do we know exactly what they did, how they created them? We don't. I mean, that evidence, I mean, there probably are notebooks with some indications of how they created it, but, you know, I think the art is lost, but it doesn't stop us from saying, but these things are designed. So, again, I think we need to distinguish, you know, the fact of design from the evidence for it. And, you know, I gave that example of throwing marbles where they arrange themselves as letters. Even if we don't know the causal story behind how they arrange themselves, we would know that they were designed. So that arrangement was designed. So, you know, this is why I think design raises a number of questions. There is the question of manufacture. How was this design implemented? Did the designer act through a derived intelligence? You know, so I write a computer program that then does something that looks intelligent. You know, I didn't do it directly. I did it through the computer program, and yet what the computer program does, it's a deterministic process. You could say it operates according to natural laws, and yet the output, if it's, you know, doing something interesting, solving some problem, you can't just say, oh, there was no intelligence there. It's just that the intelligence is once removed. Well, what if it's twice removed, 3 times removed? You know, and not that I want to say that this is what the designer, what God did, but you know, and throughout the Bible, there are angels. Angels are intermediaries. I mean, that's the point. An intermediary acts between. They're still intelligent, but they're not the direct agency of God. They're an indirect agency. God can use also secondary causes. You know, you have the famous story of Joseph, where Joseph's brothers are concerned that he's going to kill them once Jacob is gone. And he says, you know, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. So God was working his purposes out in that. So, you know, who is the ultimate cause? I mean, in a sense, all causal tracks go back ultimately to God, who is the creator of everything. But God does use intermediate causes. Some of those can be intelligence. Some of those, for all we know, are not intelligent. You know, and this takes me back also to this example of a rusted automobile. You know, there's clear design there. There's clear effects of weathering, of chance, and one of the challenges then can be, as an intelligent design person, to tease apart, to pull apart what are the effects of intelligence and what are the effects of these natural forces. But again, I think all of this requires careful thinking, and also not just automatically saying, oh, because something is designed, therefore there was a violation of natural laws. You know, it's not clear to me if God, at the moment, let's say God created the first cell, if a video camera were running on the process, would we see that there was a miracle being performed, or some sort of violation of natural laws, or would there be some sort of self-organization seeming to go on, which was remarkable, highly improbable, but conservation of energy was preserved, you know, no physical laws as far as we know were violated. I think that could well happen. You know, Richard Dawkins, at one point in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, says that he can imagine a statue of the Virgin Mary, a marble statue, waving, and he says this would not require a miracle. All it would require is that you had certain quantum events that in synchrony went up, caused the hand to go up and back. So, I would think that's a miracle if it happened, but for him, it would not involve any violation of natural laws. So anyway, I think I've gone too far, gone long enough, and we may want to shift for the next. Oh,
It should be okay now.
okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks go to the speakers for fascinating exchange of views. Now it's time for questions. Please keep your questions short and specific so that as many people as possible can take the floor and ask the question. There's a microphone on my left-hand side. Please feel free to ask your questions. Here on this side. You are kindly requested to use microphone.
Ja mam pytanie do pana profesora Sady.
I have a question that goes to Professor Sady.
Myśląc o
When you think
fantastycznym
about fantastic organization of your body,
własnego organizmu, nigdy nie...
has it ever occurred to you,
Kiedy pan myśli o tym wspaniałym zorganizowaniu?
well, when you think about this perfect plan, has it ever occurred to you that
że może jednak to było zaplanowane,
it was planned,
że pan powstał,
the fact
że
that you
jest
were
w ten sposób
planned and
fantastycznie zorganizowany?
made and so wonderfully organized? Doesn't give you hope and joy that the designer wanted you to exist? Right, that's the question.
No, samo w sobie nie daje mi
It does not give me joy because I don't know why the designer called me into existence. Maybe for fun, maybe as an experiment on me, like we run experiments on rats that when we put them into a maze, they have their lives organized, but it's not made for them. So there is a question whether in fact, well, I read biological books. When I read about how it works, it boggles my mind. That's why I ask William this question, whether this requires continuous action from outside the world so that my body keeps functioning. But it doesn't change my concerns. Of course, I know all these stories. I have devoted part of my life to studying various religious systems, and it's hard for me to choose. Next question, please. Hello, I have two questions. The first concerns the understanding of a purpose, because it seems to me that you speak about different purpose. Dr. Dembski speaks about the purpose of context of life, origin, contrasting it with randomness. Professor, on the other hand, relates not to the origin of life, but to the question of whether life has a purpose. So, the reason why we're created. Dr. Dembski speaks about causal effect versus the origin of life. So, do we understand this in a right way? Other aspects of causality. It's important for me when it comes to this origin, because why life was created. We speak about ontological purposes of life rather than the life creation as such. If we refer it, we speak about another phase reserved for under discussion. So there was somebody that designed you. Is it just an incident? Science, the concept of naturalism. And here comes the second question. You speak about the violation of laws of nature. So do you speak about this in the context of creationists? So not lack of probability of life creation in a specific period of time, a number of molecules in the world or cells in the world. If I understand the standpoint of both of you, well, all physical variables, chemical variables are perfectly tuned to create life that is based on carbon. So life creation does not violate science in this way. What is more probable? Is it more probable as the result of pure chemical or biological process, as the result of these heat waves, materialistic explanation, or is it more probable to have this intelligent design explanation? Both are in line with laws of nature, and laws of nature confirm creationism. So the fact that the world was perfectly created in all its physical and chemical laws, it is fine-tuned to create life. If you could answer these questions. Unfortunately, our time is limited, so just one question, which is more important? The first one, because it's a springboard to the second topic. So whether the world was built this way from the beginning. So do you refer this causality to the same thing? Causality, both doctor and professor. To the creation causality, the world's origin, regardless of what was the ontological purpose. We live to be saved, to have eternal life, or is there anybody, anything behind the moment of creation of life? Do you refer to this purpose, or do you understand ontological purpose of life, that is, life has a purpose of eternal salvation? Well, basically, we mean the latter, because when speaking about the world, you asked about something, this anthropic principle is somewhere in the background, that the world is built so that life could have been created and is carbon-based life. One simple answer is that our world does not have to be the only one. If something naturally gave rise to the world, this something might have created 10 to the power of 40,000 of different worlds that are governed by different laws. We happen to be one with these contents coordinated, because other things could not have been organized otherwise. So this is where we are. If we have convened here, it was possible in this world only. Regarding the purpose, there are moral questions, and the meaning of life arise somewhere in the background. It pertains to the sense of life. If we take the world in a simple way, the galaxies that are circulating, they'll be circulating until everything equalizes and dies because of heat. There are no other prospects. We focus this question upon us at the end of the day when it comes to the purpose. It's an interesting question, pertains to us, not animals, not fungi or animals.
I'm afraid I missed, again, about a minute of what you said, not the question. So let me, though, just speak briefly. I think, we keep teleology, the Greek refers to an end or a purpose. In some ways, I think intelligent design is getting at something more basic, which is intelligent agency. The word intelligent comes from the Latin. It's inter, lego, choose between. Intelligence is by choosing between, they eliminate some possibilities, focus on others, they create information. That's what intelligences do, and it's through a process of decision. we can tell all of that without talking about what's the function of the thing that's designed. I mean, we had this example, we've considered these examples of things that are clearly designed, but we don't know what the function is. And if we don't know what the function is, we probably don't know what the purpose of the designer was in creating it. So it seems that these sorts of questions about what's the function, how could we construct it, how was it manufactured, what was the purpose, all of these are questions logically downstream from, is it designed at all? Was there an intelligence involved? And it seems until we answer that question, all these other questions, we really don't even need to concern ourselves with them so much. And unless we can answer that question affirmatively, then basically the Darwinist, the materialist, wins the game. So that's where I would put the focus. But I don't want to get too far afield because this is already taken up quite a bit, and I think we want to just keep the questions moving. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Dobry wieczór. Profesorze Sady, powiedział pan
Good
profesor,
evening.
że
Professor Sady, you said that the Earth crust undergoes renewal, and because of that we'll never find how evolutionary process took place. Do you not consider, Professor, the theory of macroevolution? I emphasize the word macroevolution is empirically unverifiable and unverifiable, and therefore cannot be regarded as scientific theory. Therefore, it competes with other scientific theories regarding the origin of life. Thank you. Evolution is something that keeps constantly happening on this earth. About 70 million years ago, dinosaurs ruled the earth, and some of my ancestors were seeking their chances. They began living on trees. And we see the fossil record. They have opposable thumbs instead of paws so that they could grasp benches, and have their eyes moves to the front of the head. Although you lose some peripheral vision, someone could sneak up behind, unlikely to see them. If I had eyes like a horse, I could see all around. But they gained three-dimensional vision instead, which gives me a better chance to survive when jumping from bench to bench. And this is what we observe. Then dinosaurs were wiped out, and there is a fossil record that shows us the development of mammals that stretches back over 66 million years in history. Today we have 6,000 species of mammals. Several million years ago, my ancestors came down from the trees to the ground. And I still have opposable thumbs, but I don't have them on my feet, because opposable thumbs turned out non-functional on my feet. Macroevolution happens, but the question remains whether it happens according to some design, some plan, or does it happen in a natural way. The fact that I have opposable thumbs because I had to grasp branches does not mention any supernatural elements. Not micro. 230 million years ago, there were no mammals on Earth. There were some tetrapods or something like that, I don't remember the exact names. 600 to 700 years ago, there were no animals on Earth. Something that resembles more than sponges appeared back then. Is evolution verifiable? If we cannot find traces, I'm the chairperson, and now over to the lady who's been waiting to ask this question. We observe evolution for hundreds of years, of millions of years. It's in the material that we have explored since Cambrian explosion. Earlier, no traces might have been preserved after proto-evolution 4 billion years ago. I'd like to ask a question,
Chciałam zadać takie pytanie.
a short question to Professor Dembski, but first I want to make a comment to what Professor Sady said. Throughout the debate, I had the impression that you answered the question whether if something was created purposefully, does it imply further purpose of this purposefulness? But this is not a question. The topic of the debate, a simple question based on a simple example. Seeing a galleon ship or a cathedral from Notre Dame that are made of Lego blocks, when we see it, somebody had instructions, an idea, or was it shaking millions of years and it shook out the cathedral of Lego box. Seeing this complication, was it a project? And my question to Professor Dembski, if you can shake a Lego box for millions of years, can you shake out the Notre Dame Cathedral? Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking, it's not the way it is. If there was a design, it was earlier. If there is a purpose, it will be a purpose in the future. I have been asking whether detecting a design can tell us anything about the purpose. If someone has designed us, why? Can we see the design? That's the question. As a physicist by training, I don't see any design. I know too little about biology. I'm impressed when I read about the functioning of a single living cell of my living organism. I'm wondering how is it possible for it to function like that. DNA is 30 billion atoms arranged in the right order, as it is. Professor Dembski is requested to make a comment.
Yeah, well, I think I was asked to comment on shaking Lego boxes, a Lego box where then what would emerge would be something like the Notre Dame Cathedral. Turns out in Las Vegas, I think when a die is thrown, when they play craps as it's called, they retire the dice, I think, every 600 throws. Why is that? Because the dice wear down. If you're shaking a Lego box for 1 billion years, all you're going to have is powder there. So you're not going to have Notre Dame Cathedral. But let's say they kept their shape, then you'd have to ask, how likely is it for them to come together in those ways? There are many more ways in which you would not get a Notre Dame Cathedral, many more ways in which you would not get anything that would suggest intelligent design. So, I think it's hopeless if that's what you're thinking. Other people, physicist Fred Hoyle talked about having a tornado go through a junkyard and create a Boeing 747 airplane. I think that's the sort of thing we're looking at. So, yeah, highly improbable, highly unlikely.
Prosimy o kolejne pytanie.
Hello, I have a question to both gentlemen, but Professor Dembski is the main addressee because he received fewer questions. I felt that we strayed away from the main topic, whether teleological explanations are needed in natural sciences. In mathematics, they are not needed. There's no purpose. Pythagoras' theorem is explained in some way without any specific purpose. Such teleological explanations, I understand that intelligent design aims to prove or demonstrate in some way that a creator or designer exists and so on. But does the science really need it? Is it necessarily? Because they don't deal with God. There's nothing wrong with that. We cannot accuse sciences that they do not deal with God, neglect, they don't try to prove or disprove God's existence. They simply examine how it works, not why. So it seems to me that teleological explanations in natural sciences are necessary. They lead nowhere. What can you explain theologically?
Well, I think you're conflating, bringing together two things that need to be kept separated. I mean, I'm trained as a mathematician, so I see mathematics as the language of science. It's the infrastructure, if you will, with which we do science. But then the content of science, what science tells us, what the scientific theories are, I think that's for nature to tell us. And it seems nature can tell us that we're dealing with intelligent design. Nature can tell us that we're perhaps not dealing with intelligent design. I mean, if Darwin's theory were as successful as his advocates hope, intelligent design would be dead in the water. But it is a very problematic theory. It does not, the Darwinian mechanism, when you put it through its informational paces, when you try to understand its creative power, it seems to be very, very limited. Yes, you can get something like antibiotic resistance and insecticide resistance, but how do you get insects in the first place? How do you get these organisms? I think that's the challenge, and I don't think the Darwinian explanations have come anywhere close to doing it, to explaining that. I think the reason Darwinism holds such sway over people is because intelligent design is artificially ruled out. A friend of mine, colleague named Philip Johnson, who's really one of the founders of the intelligent design movement, he said, there's a game show in the United States called Jeopardy where the answer is given and then you have to pose the question. And he said, if the answer is Darwinian evolution, what is the question? He said, the question is, what is the best naturalistic explanation of how life got here? Now that's exactly right. If it's the best, that it is the best naturalistic explanation, but that doesn't mean it's the best explanation. The best explanation is one that has to leave open all the possibilities, all the valid possibilities, and then consider and then judge between them. But intelligent design is just ruled out of court. I mean, try to get a job at a mainstream university if you're an intelligent design proponent, and especially in the natural sciences, and you're going to have a very tough time. I suspect it's similar to Poland. It shouldn't be, because the shadow of communism should have woken people up and said, hey, we don't want to embrace this sort of naturalistic, materialistic worldview, and yet I suspect that it's still very dominant here. And that, I think, is to your shame.
Next question, please. I have a question that goes to both gentlemen. Could you please resolve the dilemma that stems from the question? Can we do it this way? We can break down into the distinction between physical, inanimate matter world and the problem of life. And we could conclude that the purpose of natural world, that is the living world, is survival, improvement, adaptation to prevailing conditions, because this is the process that we observe in a living world as a result of evolution. And in inanimate world, there is a tendency towards destruction, annihilation at the end of the day. Professor Sady mentioned that the world tends towards heat death. There is also contemporary cosmological model which assumes expanding universe that in its dome expands and it goes towards something like a Big Bang in reverse. There is this problem of this contradiction, but the original of life is related to its origin. So there was a coincidence of phenomena that led to this. We can assume or look for some kind of miracle of any kind, exceptionally improbable event, and look for some divine intervention. But we should distinguish what is purpose in inanimate nature and what is in living nature. I said that in my presentation. Inanimate nature does not inspire or instill hopes that it has any purpose ahead. Living nature brings some hope, but when it comes to the world of non-human beings, it is hard to say whether life and anything beyond life, does it exist beyond life? There's life for the life's sake and nothing more outside life. It ends with the death. Nothing remains at the end of the day. And basically, all our hopes must be placed in ourselves, which is why I'm concerned about the insignificance of human affairs in the vastness of the universe. Because if something is intended to create to the world, why did it realize it to small scale on a speck of dust in this unimaginable scale? Hence the timeline that I presented, 1.5 kilometers and a half of a millimeter, as the whole history of humanity. What is our significance? As if without any significance. That's all.
I would again point out that duration of time, size of universe is no indication of significance. There was a great flowering of enlightenment, insight, creativity in the Athens of the 4th and 5th century BC. By the time you get to the 2nd century, the magic is gone. I think we have this. You can't tell me that a Mozart or a Bach or a Chopin is insignificant. And the heat death of the universe, does that really matter in terms of their significance? It doesn't. It seems to me, especially if you don't treat this physical world as the end and be all, if you see it as a time that we are here, a time of testing, a time of trial, a time of growth, spiritual development, then what's it matter? I mean, heat death is not going to affect things until, 5 billion years from now that our sun becomes a red giant. Okay, I'm going to be long gone, and it doesn't bother me because I know that my future is not here. This is not my ultimate home. This is a temporary place. Now I come to that on, I would say, theological and philosophical reflection. I think a straight up materialist will have a problem of where does everything come from in the first place? Why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, why does the universe appear to be finite? I mean, it was one thing for Epicurus to speculate about life arising because we had an infinite universe and all possible combinations of matter would be achieved, and so there would be living things that would come about by pure chance. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I would say the Darwinian theory has tremendous weaknesses. There was mention of the fossil record. Fossil record is very imperfect. I mean, there are no connections between the major body groups in the Cambrian explosion. There's no evidence that they're connected. Now you can say, well, We haven't checked the fossil record enough. Well, we've done a lot since Darwin's day, and things haven't really changed all that much. So hydrothermal vents as an explanation of life's origin, how does that explain anything? I mean, basically, you're pumping heat into a system. You have a system that can withstand these great temperatures. That still doesn't address the information problem, how you get ribosomes, DNA, protein, that whole machinery to work together. So, so I think there are considerations beyond science, philosophy, and theology that I think need to be brought to bear, but I think it makes for a much healthier worldview. And if you're a materialist, you are still bringing a worldview to bear. You're saying that matter is all there is. How do you know that? So you're always going to be making assumptions. There are always going to be things that are beyond strict mathematical proof. So so you choose. We sometimes say choose your poison or choose your remedy or choose your delight. I mean, but you're going to have to settle on something. But there will be consequences. Ideas have consequences. Your commitments, your worldview commitments will have consequences in how you see things. And if you're a materialist, then your end is to be worm food, to be forgotten, and that's it. And that's a very bleak view. But I would say it's not that I come to an alternative view because I just can't stand it being a bleak view. I think to me, it is, I believe I've encountered God directly. I have a faith. It makes better sense of the world for me. So at all sorts of levels, intellectual, spiritual, faith, the community of people that I can fellowship with, all of that makes this a much more satisfying way to approach life for me.
Further questions, please. And this is going to be the last question because we are running out of time. You can ask questions after the debate. The last question, to make it even more interesting, it goes to Dr. Dembski. It was nice to listen to both of you. I have been listening to you for years, but in a virtual world. Each time I listen to debates, lectures on intelligent design, a certain argument comes to my mind. Kazimierz Hajdukiewicz, in his works, Kazimierz Hajdukiewicz asked the reader to adopt the perspective of mold living in a basement. From the basement perspective, a basement in the walls of buildings is perfectly created for the mold. Moisture, darkness, no ventilation, sources of cellulose. There is no other possibility to create basement for this mold specially, so that it could thrive here. So my question, does the intelligent design theory make this mistake, accepting the subjective perspective, only a human one?
I'm not sure this analogy holds up. I mean, for instance, the mold obviously doesn't have consciousness. Now, what if it could reflect? Okay, what would it think? That these conditions have been set up for it? I mean, it seems that certainly the cellar allows it to exist. Does it know that it's thriving more in that cellar than any place else? I think probably not. It's got a very limited perspective. It seems that we, with our minds, can have a broader perspective. We can see what human thriving looks like in different contexts. Would the mold be able to figure out that the cellar is designed? If so, could we figure out that our world is designed? If we can do that, that at least takes us some distance toward the designer or God. But then I think we do run into are we an experiment by a grad student hacker in a simulation, or do we have a trickster God? So those become questions, and I think we have to sort those out on other grounds. I was asked recently, as a colleague of mine, I did a book on it was titled Understanding Intelligent Design, and he wanted to know what's the best argument for the existence of God as far as we're concerned. So he sent this to a number of colleagues, and for me it was the extravagance of creation. I remember driving through Poland in 1972, seeing towns where everything was painted the same drab color. It's because the communists, with a command economy, decided that, well, we're going to distribute only these buckets of paint, and so, have at it. Enjoy your drab grays and yellows. But this is a world of colors. It's not a world of drab. We have people like Bach and Mozart and Chopin. We have artists like Rembrandt, El Greco. So I mean, there's an extravagance to it. Why do we have pleasure and pain? We can imagine a world in which we're motivated to do things simply by pain, and then with the cessation of pain, we get what we want. But instead, we have the full range of things. So it seems that there is a richness to the world which it's hard to account for. Our consciousness, our creativity, the things that the fact that science is possible. I have a colleagues Jay Richards and Guillermo Gonzalez. They've written a book called The Privileged Planet, where they say that our place in the universe has been specifically designed to help us in scientific discovery. It's a big deal that the moon and the sun look exactly the same size in the sky, because it allows the moon to occlude the sun in a perfect eclipse, and then there's a lot of interesting science that flows from that. We're in a place in the galaxy where we can see the rest of the galaxy. If we were closer to the center, there would be too much interference. So, this seems to me an incredibly rich world, a world in which there's also great tragedy and suffering, but also great opportunities for love and high aspirations. But I think you need a broader perspective for that. If you take a materialist perspective, you won't see it. And this is why faith is essential. It's without faith, it is impossible to please God, because you won't see God. So I think, that's, why don't I leave it there unless there's another question.
Professor Sady, would you make a comment? Professor Sady, will you be commenting?
No. Czyli co? Zgodzimy się.
Shall we agree that science
Nauka co do celu
has nothing to say about purpose? However, you hope that science allows us to look at the question of purpose in a better way, or in a different way, because it strengthens the fact that this world are not the end of the story, and it is rested on science. So we don't know the purpose, neither of us. We can only believe that there is one, but you try to instill hope that we can have a deeper perception or different perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, just a referee in a football match has the right to add a few minutes to a regular playing time. I will exercise the right and give you the floor to Professor Karpiński for a brief comment. Thank you very much. I've been listening to the discussion and the debate, and I have a few clarifications. First, it has been known for a decade that, well, previously it was believed that evolution has no purpose. Now there are several publications in prestigious journals like Nature showing that, unfortunately, evolution does have a purpose. What's the purpose? Wait a second. First of all, decreasing information entropy in genome evolution. When there is decreasing information entropy, it is possible to predict mathematically which nucleotide will mutate. There are several publications, including the one on COVID, which reflects the insects adapting to pesticides, decreasing information entropy in genomes. It was a breakthrough made with research with COVID when comparing 3 different evolutionary forms of COVID over 3 years. The information entropy for the same gene, the same protein, decreased. This is the first thing. The second thing, Nature publication. Detlef gave a group of 2022 discussing the fact that there is no randomness mutation. It's been challenged, this randomness. There is direct mutation across genome in Arabidopsis, that is plant genome. To conclude my intervention related to intelligent design, I will ask both you questions based on another discovery related to photosynthesis. D1 protein is the backbone of oxygenating photosynthesis. From the point of view of evolution, from cyanobacteria to higher plants, the protein duplicates. In cyanobacteria, it occurs with a single copy. In all eukaryotic organisms, it is in a double copy for the photosystem. 2. The calculated mutation rate between these genomes as a distance prokaryotic genomes, eukaryotic cyanobacteria and higher plants. The difference is 8 billion years. The duplication of this protein to happen, it exceeds the existence of the Earth. So please comment this. Isn't this the proof that there is an intelligent design that exceeds the formation of the Earth? Duplicate protein D1 exceeded in time, and D2. I cannot comment the question because I'm not a biologist myself by education. I don't know these studies, but there is one thing. Imperial College of London published that, but I don't read these studies because I don't have enough time to read that all. The first part of the statement is a bit confusing. The question of purpose is confused with the question of prediction in sciences. When we ask about purpose in sciences, it is something different than we predict about the future, whether science predicts the future. Yes, indeed. Science predicts the future, eclipses of the sun. It says that the sun will alter once the nuclear power runs out. We have predictions. Before we had the first nuclear bomb, we knew it would be detonated. But when we ask about the purpose, well, this was our understanding. The purpose in ethical sense. So the question about the sense of life, as much as it is scientific purpose of evolution, what is that like? Life. Life for the life's sake. It's nothing new. Entropy. If there is reduction of entropy, in maths you can predict which nucleotides in genome will mutate, so there is no randomness. Well, so we gain the ability to predict something. It's not randomness, but the place and
Muszę
probability.
tutaj Państwu przerwać.
I need to intervene, ladies and gentlemen.
Prawdopodobne zawsze zachodzą w
It
pewnych
happens because there are
okolicznościach.
probability for
Potrafię
specific
określić
Będę
prawdopodobieństwo.
przyznawał żółte
places.
kartki
I will give yellow coupons for those discussing it this way. Consequences, entropy reduction.
Doktorze Dembski, prosimy
Dr.
o
Dembski, can you make a comment?
Okay, I've been hearing through my earpiece that most of what they've been telling me that translation was not possible because you were not on the microphones. But let me just say this. Any system that can do targeted mutation to change itself in response to certain situations and adapt itself, it seems to me is a very complicated system, and that targeted mutation mechanism itself would need to be explained, and that to me would suggest intelligent design. The other thing I would say is to the degree that there is targeted mutation, it seems to me there's also a degree to which there is still random mutation. And when I think of something like sickle cell anemia or various genetic diseases, it seems that those happen by chance because there is some sort of copying error. I mean, and there is error correction in the DNA code. So if there's error correction, that means there is still a level of error, and error correction is never perfect, so there will be errors, and so there will be mutation in that sort of conventional random sense. So I don't think you can just say it's all targeted mutation. So it seems to me that it's probably going to be a mix. When I hear targeted mutation, I also think of James Shapiro, natural genetic engineering, where organisms are basically doing their own engineering. Whenever I've interacted with James Shapiro, he's a famous molecular biologist at University of Chicago, I've asked him, how do you get systems that are able to do their own natural genetic engineering? And he's always refused to answer that question. But that's, so you always have to take it one step further back. Where do you get these systems that can do all these fantastic things? And it seems that you're left either with some sort of naturalistic, chance-based story, chance and necessity. And if you try to put probabilities on it, it seems that the probabilities are very small, or you have a design option.
Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of this debate. Thanks to the speaker, Professor Sady and Dr. Dembski,
za to,
for the fact that you have been with us.
co teraz powiem, za co dziękuję.
Thanks for what?
Dziękuję za to, że pomogli nam lepiej zrozumieć
For helping
to,
us
czym
out
jest
what
nauka,
science is,
jak funkcjonuje
how
nauka
science
i jak
operates,
może funkcjonować.
how science can
Dziękuję
operate, thanks to the
organizatorowi
organizers,
Fundacji
En Arche Foundation,
której odbyło
that
się
made
to
it
spotkanie.
possible to
Dziękuję również Państwu
organize
za
this
wysłuchanie
meeting.
tej
Thanks
debaty
for listening to this
i mam
debate,
nadzieję,
and
że
I
było
hope
to dla
it was a
Państwa
fruitful time for
owocne
you
naukowe.
and brought scientific
Na
reflection.
koniec przypominam o
And there
zjawisku
is an
książkami
expo stand
Fundacji
with
En
En Arche
Arche,
books.
gdzie nawet można
You can
między
buy
innymi nowe wydanie
the latest
pracy
work
doktora
by
Dembskiego,
Dr.
wnioskowanie
Dembski,
o projekcie, a może nawet i
or you
uzyskać
can
autograf.
get a signed copy.
Zapraszam również do odwiedzin
Visit
strony
our
internetowej
website of the organizer,
Fundacji
En Arche.
pod adresem
This is
www.enarche.pl,
www.enarche.pl.
gdzie można nabyć
You can buy
rozmaite
different
książki
books,
naukowe
scientific
i
books and
popularno-naukowe.
popular science books.
Zapraszam również do
And
śledzenia
follow us in
profilu
social media,
Fundacji En Arche
on
na
Facebook
Facebooku i
and
YouTubie.
YouTube.
Z mojej
That's all
strony
from me.
to
Thank you
wszystko.
very much.
Kłaniam się nisko i do zobaczenia.
Hope to see you soon.